Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today we are reading Soiled Doves, Prostitution in the Early West. Today we are on to chapter 5, which is The Entrepreneurs. Before that, we have Chicago Joe, Hennessy of Helena, Montana. Here's her image. Alright, let's go ahead and get to chapter 5. Although the Madams were among the early entrepreneurs, historians often fail to recognize their significant contribution to the Western economy. These enterprising women who played an important role within their communities were never invited to join or attend a commercial club. They were not accepted by society and in most cases denied the protection of the law due to their profession. Collectively, their businesses employed the largest group of women on the frontier. They supplied a home for thousands of females who would have otherwise been forced to live on the streets. The majority of madams owned their own real estate, and all provided a considerable amount of revenue to their city or town. They paid property, school, and county taxes, license fees, and filled the pockets of corrupt officials and police officers. The society that did not respect these businesswomen nonetheless expected them to donate generously to churches and local charities. Merchants who profited off the ladies overcharged them for liquor, food, and personal goods. In order to run a successful business with a substantial return, the Western Madame had to have a great deal of patience and more than usual the amount of business acumen. Josephine Airy, known as Chicago Joe, was one of these women. In 1858, at the young age of 14, a pretty girl named Mary Welsh left her home in Ireland behind to find a better life in America. Several weeks later, she arrived in New York with an Irish brogue, an empty pocketbook, and a lot of ambition. The first thing Mary did was change her name to be more stylish. Josephine Airily. The second thing she did was find work. Since she had little experience, she no doubt took a menial job. She eventually tired of New York, and a few years later, Josephine moved on to Chicago, where she became a member of the demi-monde. She was a hard-working young woman who was proficient at her profession, and in 1867, at the age of 23, Josephine boarded a train for the rich mining town of Helena, Montana. Josephine brought 3 things with her from Chicago: her savings, experience, and the charm of the Irish. It was obvious there was money to be made in a rough town with its muddy streets and clapboard houses, so she invested in a piece of property on Wood Street. Her first business venture was a crude one-story hurdy-gurdy house, which became so profitable that 3 years later Josephine needed to expand. Because she lacked the necessary capital, Josephine had to borrow from one of Helena's notorious lenders, Alexander Lavenberg. His conditions were hard to meet, but the intrepid lady agreed to them. Quote, Josephine Airy had mortgaged everything, including her underwear, 3 dozen pair of undergarments, end quote. Her new venture, however, was successful, and she paid Lavenberg off 6 months before the note was due. When the terrible fire of 1874 swept Helena, the majority of the buildings burned to the ground. Since few of the landowners had money to rebuild, Josephine was able to purchase their property, and at the age of 30, she became the largest landowner on Wood Street. 4 years later, Josephine Airy married James T., quote, Black Hawk, end quote, Hennessy. Together, they built Fireproof Stone Dance Hall and the Red Light Saloon, with the new enterprise to manage. Josephine rented her properties to other businesses and became an influential landlady in Helena. At that time, she acquired the sobriquet of Chicago Joe. For the next 10 years, Jo took care of the profitable Red Light Saloon and her ladies. In 1886, when the city's fathers barred prostitution and declared hurdy-gurdy houses immoral, Jo boldly challenged the courts. She hired an attorney who defended her with a few brilliant words and a Webster's dictionary. According to Webster, a hurdy-gurdy was a marginal device that resembled a hand organ. Since the music at the Red Light District was provided by a three-piece band, not a hurdy-gurdy, the case was thrown out of court. Jo was allowed to keep the doors of her saloon open. As the population of Helena continued to grow more sophisticated, Jo decided she needed a new stylish business. She built a large, elaborate establishment named Col Salon, a combination theater and variety house, and began importing fresh feminine talent from the East. The presence of these well-groomed, attractive ladies and entertainers made the Col Salon the most popular place in Helena. Prostitution and bawdy amusement provided a handsome profit. Jo's new Col Salon was elite. It had elegant furnishings and many amenities, including special boxes equipped with electric bells, which were connected to the bar. An eager gentleman could order a fast drink as well as a woman. The proprietress had thought of everything. Chicago Jo had become an impressive woman. Quote, her theater was a success, generating a weekly payroll of $1,000 and more. She paid taxes on more than $200,000 worth of property, end quote. Josephine, at the age of 44, was wealthy and powerful. Her donations to local charities were as large as her contributions to certain political candidates. She dressed in fashionable gowns, enjoyed luxurious furs, and wore expensive jewelry. Her lifestyle was flamboyant, and her many parties and balls were the talk of Helena. However, the good life could not last forever. As Helena grew into a city of prominence and culture, the Corazon lost its novelty and charm. In 1893, the financial panic and eventual depression put an end to prosperity in Josephine Hensley. She tried desperately to save her businesses, but lost everything except the Red Light Saloon. The notorious Chicago Jo and her husband moved into an apartment above the saloon and lived a quiet life. On October 25th in 1899, at the age of 55, the colorful Chicago Jo died of pneumonia. The citizens of Helena provided a large funeral and made long speeches at her accomplishments. And the young, uneducated Irish girl who rose to fame and wealth became another page in the book of Helena's turbulent history. One of the most fascinating stories of the mid-1800s was that of Mary Elena Pleasant, a lady of intrigue and mystery,
who was known to San Franciscans as Mammy Pleasant. Although many people called her a saint, others claimed she was a sinner. Maybe she was both.
Mary Helen, a Georgia slave, was the daughter of a white man and Haitian cordon. She was a bright, attractive girl who had no trouble passing as a white child. At the age of 10, she came to the attention of her owner and was sent to a convent to be educated. She never returned to the plantation. Mary Ellen became part of the Underground Railroad and spent the next few years helping her people to escape from slavery. During the time, she met and married a wealthy abolitionist, twice her age. He died a few years later, leaving a small fortune. Following his death, Mary Ellen continued to work with her underground and contributed a large amount of money to the cause. Her skin was so light that she had to darken it with walnut stain to pass as black. walnut stain. As Mary Ellen's involvement with the movement became well known, she was forced to flee to New Orleans for safety, where she became a cook in a fashionable restaurant. Tales of California's rich gold fields filled the newspapers, and in 1852, Mary Ellen left New Orleans for the wealth of San Francisco. Her first job in the city was as a cook for two well-to-do bachelors. Her first job was in the city as a cook for two well-to-do bachelors. Mary Ellen's cooking became a popular attraction that shrewd woman used the remainder of her money to open an elegant boarding house. At that time in her life, the attractive lady could have easily passed as a white female. She already used to assuming disguises and was clever enough to be successful at the art of deception. Mary Ellen, however, chose to take her place in society as a member of her own race and became known as Mammy Pleasant. Her boarding house was a popular enterprise, and she soon added several beautiful young women to her staff who became known as Progazzi. These girls dressed in the latest fashions, and through Mammy's influence, the majority of them either married wealthy men or became involved in profitable alliances. They all remained under Mammy's control, and she manipulated their lives whenever it would benefit her businesses. Since her first boarding house was so successful, Mary Ellen added more houses throughout the city. Her clientele were rich and influential, and her attractive ladies were willing to participate in an evening of pleasure. She often had special parties for important men. At one of these parties, she met Thomas Bell, a wealthy investor who became Mary Ellen's partner and frontman for her many ventures. With the help of her Bell, Mary Ellen purchased her first rental property on the Barbados coast, an unsavory area from which she collected high rents. She also invested in laundries, brothels, saloons, and lively stables.
As more and more penniless black people began arriving in San Francisco, she either hired them to work for her or found them employment as servants in wealthy households.
In return, she demanded faithfulness and expected the ex-slaves to bring her the secrets of their employers. Mary Ellen carefully set up a network of loyal spies throughout San Francisco. They kept her informed on every scandal or business deal. Powerful men began coming to Mammy for advice, and she willingly gave it, always with an eye toward her own financial gain. Mary Ellen and Thomas Bell set up crooked business deals and ambitious schemes that made her rich and added to Bell's already considerable fortune. Within a few years, the clever woman was able to sit in her home on Washington Street and manipulate the city. Mary Ellen, however, did more than rule others. She gave of herself as well as her money. She was a strong civil rights advocate long before the movement existed and sent large checks to abolitionist John Brown, who was attempting to free the slaves. No black person was ever turned away from her door empty-handed. On several occasions, Mary Ellen was responsible for moving innocent girls from the houses of prostitution and helping them to lead a better life. Shortly before her death, the October 13th, 1985 San Francisco Examiner ran this story, quote, "Neither creed, color, sex, or condition in life ever had meaning for her when her intent once had been awakened. Her deeds of charity are as numerous as gray hairs in her proud old head. I want no complaints," she said. "I can't abide by them. No matter what I've done, it has been little enough. I have frequently filled my buggy with fruits and turkeys enough. I have frequently filled my buggy with fruits and turkeys, cooked, stuffed, and uncooked. It was all the same, and taken them to the churches and hospitals. I am a Catholic, but one church was the same as another to me. It was all for the cause." End quote. No two stories are alike when it came to Mary Ellen, Mammy Pleasant. She was either an evil woman or a female Robin Hood. It is known that she and Thomas Bell built an elaborate mansion on Octavia Street, which for many years was called the House of Evil. End quote. It was rumored that the strange things, including voodoo, took place within its elegant walls. When Bell married Teresa King, Mammy Pleasant remained in the house until her death in 1892, then moved into her own apartment. Mammy Pleasant remained in the house until her death in 1892, then moved into her own apartment. That doesn't make much sense, but okay. As the years passed, Mammy Pleasant grew older in body, with her mind remained as active as ever. She had spun her spider's webs for almost 50 years, and it slowly disintegrated around her. At the turn of the century, Mammy Pleasant claimed she was poverty-ridden, and the courts found her an insolent debtor. She died a few years later in 1904 at the age of 92. Whatever secrets Mammy Pleasant had, and no doubt she had many, went to the grave with the mysterious lady. 92 is pretty good, like, holy crap, especially in the 1900s, that's insane. In the early days, Seattle was a town of young unmarried males, with a ratio of 2 women for every 90 men. Most females over 15 years old were spoken for or married, and there were no old maids. As thousands of single men poured into Seattle with money to spend and time to kill, it became a wide-open town where gambling, robberies, and prostitution flourished. The high-class ladies lived in expensive hotels, and the girls operated along Skid Road. The name Skid Road, a logging term, once meant a trail of greased skids used by ox teams to haul logs to the sawmills. A skid road in any logging or sawmill towns became the term for the district containing bordellos and saloons which catered to the needs of loggers and lumbermen. The explanation is a lot nicer than the way it sounds. This was the world of Mary Ann Boyer. There has been very little written about Mary Ann Boyer, Seattle's own Madame Damnable. She was a diminutive lady who stood less than 5 feet tall and when aroused had a repertoire of profanity that would shock a hardened sinner. Mary Ann was a friend of Doc Maryland, a man who was one of the key factors in the city's early growth. Doc, for unknown reasons, used his influence to establish her business and was instrumental in helping the feisty little lady to reach the top of her profession as Seattle's first madame. Her house stood on point, overlooking the Sound, and it has been shown in many old history books. Unfortunately, the owner's name was omitted due to her occupation. It's just another example of censoring history, really. Mary Ann's establishment resembled a southern mansion, which had been moved to the Pacific Northwest. It was a 2-story structure built with square columns, an 8-foot front door, and a magnificent veranda. At the rear of the house, near the kitchen, were several small cubicles, such as those designed for Southern slaves, but there was no slaves in Seattle. In these small rooms, the girls provided necessary services for visiting gentlemen. Although she was often referred to as, quote, demon in petticoats, end quote, and an old dragon, Madame Damnable operated her business with finesse and discretion. She had a kind heart and was good to her ladies. When Washington became a territory in 1853, its first legislative session was held in Madame Damnable's house. While in session, the Queen of Sin, charged the members outrageous prices for food and lodgings, which was grudgingly paid. If a gentleman protested, the lady would hurl her favorite oaths at man, often accompanied by a barrage of pots and pans. Important dignitaries who became guests at Madame Damable's house enjoyed her fine food and luxurious bedrooms. Most of the men had no idea of what went on in the small rooms near the kitchen, unless they were presented with the appropriate answer to the question, "What is your pleasure?" The Madame's first-floor parlor and upstairs bedroom serves the judiciary from Monday to Friday. On weekends, when the loggers came to town, they were available for more pleasurable pursuits. Sin and legislators, money made the little lady a fortune, and Seattle famous. As Seattle grew, many religious groups began a dive to remove prostitution from their midst. Madame Damable's operation, however, was so unobstructive, unobtrusive, and her clientele so respected, that the local residents left her alone. The little Madame, with her large vocabulary, went on raking in the money and providing a necessary service. The demon in petticoats operated until she passed away in the late 1860s. Her brawny personality added to a touch of color to old Seattle, and her establishment had served the town well. Next is a piece of Chicago Joe, or how she died, really, and then it goes on for some images. I'm gonna go ahead and do the images up until page 102, along with the little excerpt here of Chicago Joe dead. Mrs. Josephine Hensley, better known throughout Montana and other parts of the West as Chicago Joe, died yesterday morning at 2:30 o'clock at her home on Wood Street. Chicago Joe was a woman of extraordinary strength of character. She and her place in their time were known far and wide throughout this western county. Her life in some respects was an eventful one. Most of it was spent in Helena as its most steering period. In those days, Jo herself presided nightly over the cashing of checks and the general business of the theater. She wore a flowing robe of heavy velvet, generally green or purple, with a pink-lined Elizabethan collar of enormous size, a wide golden jewel-studded girdle around the immense expanse where her waist once was, and jewels on every part of her dress where it was possible to place them. Thus attired and carefully painted and powdered, she presented an imposing appearance as she swept along. Chicago Joe had her faults, but she was a woman of generous impulses, and she assisted many unfortunate women who came to her for help. In former days, she contributed liberally to every public enterprise. She gave liberally also to charity. Although a hard master, she was always a generous one. Her life was a checkered one. She suffered numerous losses from friends who sought her assistance and who generally failed to return the money she loaned. Several times she was robbed by her associates. Helena Daily Independent, October 26, 1999. Josephine Hensley's funeral took place in the Cathedral of the Sacred Heart. She was buried in the Catholic cemetery. Alright, we have a photo. Mr. Hamilton, also known as the Duke, often worked for Chicago Joe and the other Madames of Helena. Photo by Timothy Gordon, a collection of Missouri, Montana. Then there's Lily and Annette, Both Lily and Annette were employed by Chicago Joe. So first is Mr. Hamilton here. And then the top image is Lily, the bottom is Annette. Worked for Chicago Joe. Next we have Jackie. Jackie was about 15 when she began her career as a prostitute. Many girls entered the profession at an even younger age. Okay. And then next is Mammy Pleasant, San Francisco's Lady of Mysteria. So first I'll show Jackie here, the 15-year-old prostitute. And then here is Mammy Pleasant. All right. And then here's a piece on Mammy Pleasant. Two pieces on Mammy Pleasant. So let's go ahead and take a look. Life story of Mammy Pleasant. Mammy Pleasant's the colored woman who had occupied a unique position in San Francisco for nearly 5 decades, is slowly succumbing to the weight of her years. It seems that the lamp is about buried out, and slowly but surely the old Mammy is approaching the end of the road. The life of this woman has been one of intense activity since the days of her childhood. She has always been at work, and those whom she has befriended now gratefully acknowledge that her greatest efforts have been exerted unselfishly in behalf of others. Her expertise in this city and state since her arrival would form one of the most interesting volumes that California has ever known. Safely locked in her loyal breast are the secret histories of many of the prominent families of the coast. She has supplied the ladder upon which more than one proud woman and amenities is excuse me. She has supplied the ladder upon which more than one proud woman and ambitious man have climbed the wealth and social position. Her purse has ever been open to aid the needy and unfortunate. San Francisco Examiner, October 13th, 1895. And then Mammy Pleasant. The next excerpt is Mammy Pleasant, the wild-mannered old Southern mammy of romantic newspaper writers, with her spotless white apron and neckerchief and her bunch of keys and her general air of contrition for being so good, has been for many years the most discussed woman in San Francisco. She has been called a pauper, then a millionaire, a devoured Catholic, a Methodist, a leader amongst the Baptists, the essence of truth, and a purveyor, a friend of the poor, and a woman who turned every human passion and foible to her own advantage, and used the people that she chose to associate with as so many pawns on a chessboard. A woman with wonderful persuasive powers and something very hypnotic influence over the members of her own sex. She has been placed in dozens of positions of trust. Every property of this character that Mammy has controlled has faded into thin air. Charges of maladministration have been housed against her. The Taylor estate left in Mammy's charge. 6 months later, Miss Taylor and her 4 children returned out of the house. San Francisco Chronicle, July 9th, 1988. 1899. All right. And next is chapter 6, Molly Be Damn. And then there's an image that we will look at next chapter. But yeah, let me know what you thought of this chapter. What struck out to you? What was interesting? What did you really enjoy? It's a lot of strong women, and this chapter wasn't really a sappy or sad one, which is nice. Just kind of inspiring and sheds more of an accurate light on what was happening during that time in history. But yeah, if you enjoyed this, please like, please comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the little bell notification. Have a great day. Bye!